Welcome to Biz Bites, brought to you by Com Together, helping businesses like yours build their brand through telling amazing stories to engage and grow audiences on multiple platforms. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Biz Bites. And my guest today, Chandell Labbozzetta, she and I have known each other, I get off and on for a number of years now. And I'm so excited to have her as a guest because I know how much we resonate in terms of our approaches to things, even though she's in sales and I'm in marketing. And I know that there's a whole lot of areas that she covers. And I think the best way of finding out all of those different areas is to allow her to introduce yourself. So Chandell, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Anthony. It's so great to be here. So yes, my name is Chandell Labbozzetta, and I'm the CEO of Life Puzzle and also a master trainer of neuro-linguistic programming. And we believe that sales and business success follows the 80-20 strategy of 80% psychology, 20% strategy. And we get a real kick out of helping people to bridge the gap between those things and sell with integrity, sell with authenticity, without all that sleazy, gross, pushing people into a corner, buy or die mentality. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I love all of that because as someone who's in marketing, we're perennially, I guess, scared of sales is probably the one way of saying it. And I've always found that's a really interesting thing. There's so many different organizations, and I've seen over the years where sales and marketing rarely talk to one another because there is this sort of divide between the two. And I think it comes from a lack of understanding and a lack of clarity in that. But it's also that kind of, it really is a lack of understanding of how different in some respects those two areas are. Yet I'd have to comment and say that, you and I follow each other on LinkedIn and have done quite closely for a long period of time. And the amount of times where I've sat there and thought, she's in my head and you're in my head, because we've kind of written along similar lines, completely unprepared, and gone, we're saying very similar things. And that's what I love about the approach that you take with it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, you're right about the correlations and also the key differences. And one of the things that we spend quite a bit of time educating the clients on is that, ultimately your marketing is about bringing people to the door, the right kind of people, the ideal clients that you really want to work with. And sales is effectively helping them walk through it. And I think sometimes people can confuse the idea of the sales with their marketing and their marketing with their sales. And they are really two different skill sets, and when they work together swimmingly, then that just creates amazing results in generating leads of the ideal people that are fitted for your business or your service or your product, and then creating customer delight as you sell to them and onboard them into your products and services. So I think it's a really key distinction that you make there.
And I think one of the keys as well is that I talk about it from a marketing point of view of very much about authenticity and bringing out the real you. And I love that clarity in communication is very much fundamental to what you do as well, where, as you said at the beginning, there's a lot of people who go into that real sales speech, and it's just, you just cringe when you hear it. And I can't believe that how many people would fall for something that is so obviously a sales pitch.
Yeah, look, I think it's really interesting because I call it the itty bitty shitty committee. So they're the group of people that sit on people's shoulders and tell them why they can't have what they want. And I think for a lot of people, because of experiences that they've had in sales environments, they have a lot of emotional hang-ups about sales. Some people have challenges around asking for money. Some people feel like they're being a burden. And so it just takes away a lot of congruency from the sales process. And people start acting in ways that are not authentic or congruent with themselves. And one of the things, I published a book called Confident Closing, which I love to give to anyone who's listening that would like to access it. And it's called Confident Closing. But when I originally published the book, I wanted to call it Feeding Salt to Horses, because we've all heard the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But if you feed it salt, by the time you present it with the water, it's thirsty and it makes sense to have a drink. And so I think that the sales process, when done really elegantly, is ultimately about finding out what is the salt of the people that you actually really need to connect with, and how can then you really elegantly lead them to the water so that they can have a drink. And it just makes sense to say yes, because it fits the needs, and there's a congruent interaction that goes on. So we're definitely all about authenticity, as opposed to, how can I squeeze you into this mold that doesn't fit.
Exactly. And I know something that we've both written about several times is around the listening to people as well, because I think that, and that talks to that SALT idea, is it's listening to what the symptoms are, what are they trying to, what problems are they trying to solve in terms of particularly their wants and needs. And I think too often what happens is people decide that, well, I've come up with this idea for a product or service or whatever it is, and I'm going to sell it to you whether you want it or not, whether that's they haven't necessarily done that groundwork to find out, well, what is it that people really need?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's where the marketing and sales connection is just such an important connection to make, because as you said, it's about researching and finding out, well, what are the pain points, and what is the opportunity here for this person to actually relieve the pain points or actually get a gain on the other side of the interaction. And if you don't speak to that messaging properly, then you're already behind the 8 ball. But then when it comes to the sales process, so sometimes marketing can get that really right, and then the salespeople don't follow up that message with the same efficiency, and they're so focused on perhaps the wrong selling points. Like I see lots of people pitching in a way where it's all about them and how interesting they are and how much experience they've had, and these are the projects and this is how great we are, when a lot of the time people actually don't want you to vomit their solutions all over, or your solutions all over them. What they really want is they want to know that you connect with what is the thing that is the challenge for them. And so often when we're teaching, in fact, last week I was in Auckland, I was delivering a presentation to about 200 recruiters. And one of the things we were talking about was this very concept of vomiting solutions on people. And the example that I often use is that if I come up to you on the street and just hand you a Band-Aid, then you might look at me and say, thanks, crazy Band-Aid lady, why are you giving me that? Whereas if I actually highlight that I've seen that you've got a paper cut, it's bleeding, you have a white shirt, I don't want you to get blood on your shirt, etc. What I've actually done is I've actually pointed out to you the fact that you have a need for this actual Band-Aid. And so then the reception to me offering the Band-Aid as a solution becomes a little less creepy, and also offering a solution to a problem that you can actually see now. So I think that's just so important. And that is that connection between that sales and marketing piece and getting that transition right.
Yeah, I think too often it is, people do just thrust upon you. I mean, again, using LinkedIn as an example, the amount of times, I'm sure you see it as well, that you get these connection requests from people and they basically spill their resume and tell you to use their services. And you go, I haven't even met you yet. And you're selling
Exactly.
stuff. But I found it, look, I had a sort of done some work in the not-for-profit sector over many years. And I find that same idea translates across to there, because what often happens is not-for-profits set up to do a particular task, and then they go where the funding is. So someone with some money turns around and says, and I often use this example and say, well, we set up a charity to look after, tables. And someone comes and says, well, we've got some money for 3-legged chairs. And they go, well, 4-legged tables, 3-legged chairs, we could probably do the same thing, and we'll go and grab that money. And suddenly they've drifted away from their actual thing. And the problem is on both sides. One, they've drifted away, and two, the people that have said that there's a problem with 3-legged chairs haven't actually looked to find out if there is. They've just said that that's what tickles my fancy. And I think often in business, they're doing the same thing, that they've created something. And I think we've all been guilty of it. We've created a product or a service whereby you think that people are going to want it and you try and sell it to them. And then it takes a while to realize that actually that's probably wasn't the product that was right for these people in the first place.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind is nobody thinks their baby's ugly, and I see it with business owners all the time. They create these products and these services that they think are absolutely gorgeous, and yet no one in the marketplace actually connects with what it is. And so the only person that loves it is the business owner. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about there, where people disconnect from what their clients really need to what they want to sell, and that doesn't necessarily always marry up if you don't do your homework on that.
Yeah, and I know it's certainly from a marketing perspective, it's one of the core pieces of work that I do initially with businesses is sitting down and you get to the point where you're looking at those wants and needs of different personas and really understanding it. And I think that fundamental idea is saying, well, as well that and this is where the marketing and the emotional side comes in, which is a bit like I think the marketing version of the 80-20 is a 90-10, 90% emotion, 10% justifying the emotion. And I think they feed in nicely to one another. And it's a bit like, look, I need a car to get me from A to B, but I want the Mercedes. I want the this and the that and the extras. I don't need it, but I want it. And that's what, from a marketing perspective, you're feeding into that emotion. And there's an expectation around the needs that you're going to deliver that. It's the extra stuff that you really have to tune into. And that extra stuff has to be emotive and grab people. And if you get that wrong, you're not going to get to the sales process.
Yeah, 100%. And as part of our sales training, we often will talk about human beings and the fact that we have a subconscious mind, and we often call it unconscious because most people are unconscious of their subconscious. And we live 90% of our lives unconsciously. It's the domain of all of the emotions. And so we often say that people will buy emotionally and then justify logically, as you said, and it's 90% unconscious and 10% conscious. And so, a lot of sales professionals are going out there, and even to a point, some marketers are going there looking for, what is the justification? What's the reason? What's the logic? As opposed to actually connecting with what's the emotional driver, and we're leaving 90% of the conversation on the table when we're only talking to the conscious mind or to the logical, rational mind.
Yeah, and I think, and I love where you're going with all of that, and that's why I wanted to pick up on a point as well that I think in your introduction you talk about the sales area, but and I'm going to make sure I get this right, the neuro-linguistic programming side of things, because that feeds into what you do, right? That has a very big impact on the way that you present and all of the things that you do. So tell me a little bit about that, the background of that, and how you got into that, and what the impact is.
Yeah, look, it's a very interesting story. I'll give you the high level overview for the listeners today. But my background was in sales and also marketing, predominantly business development and selling, though. And over my career, I did everything from your transactional sales, where you make 150 cold calls a day to get 10 appointments the following day, all the way up to selling, large multinational sponsorship deals that were multi-millions of dollars and took, somewhere between 6 and 18 months to actually come to fruition. I managed sales teams, etc. And one of the reasons that I started getting curious about neuro-linguistic programming was because it's an art and science on how we use the language of our mind in order to affect our results. And for me, I had always a really strong willpower. I was very connected to serving my clients and getting good results, and very driven by advancing my career for many years. But if the mark of a good job was here or above average was here, then my expectations of myself were generally up here. I'd fall short and then beat myself up for being a failure. And so often I would dust myself off and say, oh, I just have to work harder, do different things, and I'd keep going. But I always had that itty bitty shitty committee sitting on my shoulder, to a point where eventually I had what a lot of people would call a professional burnout or a nervous breakdown, and I sort of gave up. And despite the fact that I'd had great success, I sort of decided that I'd tried everything and it was too hard and that I was going to give up. And look, at the time, I'd had a mentor when I worked at KPMG who had told me about neuro-linguistic programming. And at the time, my co-founder and my mum was actually looking for a transition out of her career. She'd owned hairdressing salons and she'd been in the hair and beauty industry for years. And she said, oh, I think I'm going to make people beautiful on the insides of their heads now, not so much on the outsides of their heads. So she went off to go and do a training. And my mental health was in a very precarious state at this particular time. And so she asked me to go with her. She said, come on, it'll be fun. We'll go interstate and we'll have a girls' weekend. And this particular course that we attended was a pre-course into learning more about NLP. And it was really quite transformational because I'd engaged in lots of different elements and support to try and help me with my mental health challenges, but I hadn't had much traction in terms of getting success. And when I learned about NLP and the way that our minds are wired and the way that we bring emotions into our decision making and all of those sorts of things, the way we act, the way we behave, I was able to get a transformation. And I can honestly tell you that, I've not had any relapses in my mental health in nearly 20 years since I've conducted or since I went through that training process. So one of the main reasons that I was curious about learning about NLP, though, was because I knew that sometimes I could have a sales conversation with someone over here and the conversation went really well. And then I'd replicate that script, or that not so much script, but that kind of pitch to someone over here. And it just didn't land in the same way, and it wasn't as successful. And so I realized that there was nuances between the way in which people make decisions, the ways in which they interact, etc. And so it actually forms a really big part of the way in which we teach, because it's not a one size fits all situation. And even people who are in the same verticals, or they may have common problems, the way that they react and respond to those things is different. And so the nature of the way in which you can read situations and to question and to understand. And so that was the basis of the book. So when I learned NLP, I took those skills back into a corporation. I was hired as a national business development manager, and I worked with the team to teach them some of the concepts in NLP in terms of reading people's behavior, understanding how to make them feel most comfortable, how to decipher which is the right information to present to that person based on what their needs are. And we actually grew a business by 400% in just 6 months doing that. So our targets were to actually double the business in a 12-month period. And we way exceeded those targets and built and grew the business by 400% in 6 months. And so from my perspective, I think that there's a couple of really key things where neuro-linguistic programming will assist in the sales process. And one is to be able to understand the nuances between the differences in your customer engagement, to be able to ask great quality questions and ascertain different information that you wouldn't normally see. And then, of course, the biggest part is about the mindset of the salesperson. And so a lot of people often ask us why are we called Life Puzzle when we do sales training and leadership training and communication training. And Anthony, what we say is that sales is the number one life skill, and that there are 3 important sales that we make. So the first sale is the sale you make to yourself about your worth and your value. And if you don't nail that sale, then you're going to project that in the way that you try and get your goals. And they don't just have to be sales goals or winning business in client. It could just be anything in relation to career development, getting a great relationship. If you don't sell yourself that you're worthy and confident and you're capable, then it becomes really hard to be congruent in the activities that you do to go after that stuff. And of course,
Absolutely.
the second sale, 100%, right? And so
it's that imposter syndrome as well, isn't it? That feeds into so many people, and it does happen at all levels. It's a business thing, but it does happen on a personal level as well. And you see it. I think seeing it even increasingly in younger generations that are impacted even more by what they're seeing online all the time, and because their environment is much greater than perhaps where we grew up in a very without the online stuff. So our community was much smaller than what theirs is. And it's a big issue, I think. And it is a key thing to get right.
Yeah, 100%. And so that self-confidence and that ability to be able to generate self-confidence, even when the environment is not necessarily supportive, because obviously there's lots of cancel culture. There's lots of, challenges with social media and that online presence, as you said, so sometimes we may not necessarily see all the things that we'd like to see in those platforms, but the ability to actually generate that self-confidence, that sense of worth for oneself, it just helps you fire that itty bitty shitty committee. But then there are 2 more important sales. The second sale is the sale of influence. And what a lot of people don't realize is that we're all in sales. If you're a parent, then you're selling your child to go to bed at night, at the time you want, not what time the child wants. Or, you might be having influential discussions about when we need to get our homework done by. So, we have sales conversations with our teams when we're getting our teams to enroll in doing something in the workplace. And so we don't always have to transact products or services in exchange for money to be influential in our conversation. And so that's an important part of, can you actually communicate what you need, and to be compelling in that, to do so with a sense of authority and integrity, that someone says, yes, I want to buy into your idea and I'm going to go ahead and follow that instruction or follow your advice. So the third sale is obviously the one that we're all familiar with, which is the transactional sale. But those first two play such a huge role in terms of how well you communicate the value proposition of your product or service and what you're selling it for at the appropriate rate. Selling it for what you're worth. If you're selling a service, making sure that you're not discounting if you have products, etc. I think that's such an important part around the way in which neuro-linguistic programming, our mindset, plays into the way we actually conduct ourselves from a selling perspective.
Absolutely. When it comes down to that worth area, it really is interesting. Many stories that I've heard over the years, and some that I've been a part of, where you find you price it at a certain level thinking, well, that's reasonable. Surely I can't charge more than that. And you find that it's actually in that area where people go, oh, it's not expensive. It's probably too expensive for a cheap product. And you've put yourself in that category, whereas you up it. And I've seen that. I've been part of it where you up it and you almost get to double it. And in some cases, I remember hearing of an organization a number of years ago where they missed out on a particular contract, and they were told afterwards the only reason why was they should have put a 0 on the end of what they charged. And they would have got the gig. There was just a feeling that because they were charging so little, they weren't going to do a good enough job. And if they've literally offered to do exactly the same thing with the same personnel and the same outcomes, but put another 0 on the end, that have got the job. So, which is a hard thing to take when you're looking at it in retrospect. BizBytes is brought to you by ComTogether for all your marketing needs, so you can build your brand, engage audiences on multiple platforms. Go to comtogether.com.au, follow the links to book an appointment for a free consultation.